Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome to the Slaanesh unit roster overview. As you can see, there are a total of 17 units at launch for the Slaanesh roster, and they are subdivided into just 3 categories of Infantry, Cavalry and Chariots, and Monster and Beast. And this means that Slaanesh is actually the only faction in the game with absolutely no range units, or units with hybrid range capabilities, as the Slaanesh playstyle is entirely focused around mobility, flanking, and applying a multitude of debuffs on your enemy when your units become stronger from the pain suffered by enemy units. So getting things started with the Marauders of Slaanesh, which is the cheapest unit in the roster at just 400 cost, we have a basic sword infantry with shield. So the shield will cover 35% of all small arm missile fire from the front. It has 120 units per retinue at 100 mass, pretty standard across the board. In terms of number of units, pretty numerous, and the health is pretty healthy actually. It's considered a meat shield unit. It's impressive in terms of its damage dealing, but it can absorb damage. But in terms of stats, actually, it's more focused on melee attack than melee defense with only 20 points, and the armor is quite low. It definitely has a lot of health, so I guess it is considered a meat shield unit in that regard. The shield is nice for a little bit of defense against enemy missiles. Leadership is pretty decent at 60. It's not incredibly high, but it's also not low. Speed is very slow for the Slaanesh roster, but compared to most other factions, it's respectable. The damage is interesting because we actually have a bonus against other infantry option with 7 points. Most of the damage is going to be base, 21-7 split, and there's almost no charge bonus. In terms of abilities, we're immune to psychology, which is a nice bonus to have, and we can hide. So nothing too fancy about these units. They're good against other infantry. It's very numerous, good high health. Not really focused on defense, but because we're tanky from just having raw health, that makes us a meat shield, but most of the stats still more geared towards dealing damage. Then moving up to 450 cost, just a little bit more, we have the spear variant of the very same Marauders of Slaanesh, and you can see the sword on the arm has transformed into a giant spear-like, claw-like arm, and that's going to change sort of our damage output. We're going to have an anti-large bonus of 15 points. Most of our damage is still going to be base with 19-6 split. Overall, less charge, pretty much the same defensive stats, same health, same unit numbers, but we have a flip of the melee attack and melee defense since we now are an anti-large unit. We are more focused on defense with 32 points, with only 26 points in melee attack, and this is also compounded with our charge defense against large and charge reflection, requiring us to brace with these units. So this is really a nice frontline anti-large meat shield option with more stats focused on defense and also the bonus damage against other large units. And then with another price jump to 550 this time, we have the final version of the Marauders of Slaanesh with the Hellscourges. So usually most units have 2 variations. In this case we have 3, and they're now using this whip-like weapon, and now they are a pure defensive unit in a sense. They're now considered defenders on top of meat shield. They have very, very high melee defense for their cheap cost. Same stats across the board in terms of number of units, mass, health, armor, everything's the same. The melee attack, it's a reflection of sort of a hybrid between the sword and the spear, but it's pretty high actually at 32. Defense obviously is where it shines. There is no special damage, so essentially from the attack and the weapon strength, we have the same stat as the sword user, except we have very high melee defense, more than double of the sword variety. Obviously we're paying more for this unit as well. In terms of abilities, we have none really. Immune to psychology is pretty standard, and we get hide. Next up at 800 cost, we have the Daemonettes of Slaanesh. Now these are very fast infantry units at 54 speed, that's their calling card. They have almost no defensive stats in terms of armor, only 5 points. This is probably the lowest I see in game. And they have not a lot of health, 100 unit per retinue here, 80 mass, very light. You're not really considering them for any sort of charge collision damage. It's more of charging from behind to get the flanking bonus, since they do have flanking trait, which we'll look at a little bit later on. Melee attack, melee defense, very respectable. Magic damage, and the damage of the weapon strength is very good. 24 points of armor piercing, 8 points of base, so very heavily skewed towards armor piercing. And we also have 20 points of charge bonus, which will come in for the devastating flanker trait, which means we will double our charge bonus if we're attacking from the flank or the rear of an entity. So you want to use your speed to create angles and double your charge bonus, get them in there, dish out damage, And that's pretty much it. We are a demon unit, so we won't rout away. We'll burn up instead. We will cause fear, and that will make us immune to fear, but not terror. And because we're demonic trait, we get the 20% physical resistance on top of that. And they're also quite loud. But that's the Daemonettes of Slaanesh for you. And finally, at 1250 cost and even louder, we have the most premium infantry option in the Slaanesh roster, which is the Exalted variant of the Daemonetta of Slaanesh. And we also are very fast at 54 speed. Leadership goes up a little, armor goes up a little, health goes up a little, mass stays the same, still 100 unit per retinue. All the stats across the board goes up in terms of damage. It's still heavily focused on armor piercing, 10-28 split. Charge bonus goes up. Most importantly, we have Charmed on our attack, which will lower enemy melee attack by 8 points. This is actually a pretty significant debuff on the enemy, and you're going to see a lot of debuffs on a lot of Slaanesh units moving forward. In terms of abilities, we have the same ones, including Devastating Flanker. On top of that, we get Soul Scent, which can increase our armor piercing damage by up to 25% and our melee attack by up to 20 points if there are enemy units nearby. 30 meters, it's a pretty close range, and they have to have a morale that's wavering or lower. So for multiple units of enemies that are kind of routing away or wavering near you, you will gain up to 25% armor piercing damage, which will actually be quite a lot because most of your damage is armor piercing up to 7 points. And we can also gain 20 points of melee attack on the ready 48 melee attack, which is also very high. So very aggressive offensive units, and they're very expensive, which makes sense because debuffing enemy by 8 points of melee attack also hurts quite a bit. So excellent unit here. And as if those infantry aren't fast enough, we're now moving on to cavalry and chariots, and also a little bit quieter. We have the Hellstriders of Slaanesh, which cost 600. These have 100 base speed, only 15 points of armor. They have a shield, also 35, so they're sort of the Marauders mounted on the Hellstriders, and they have the spear variant of the weapon, and that weapon's actually going to be mostly base damage once again, 20-10 split, but they will have a bonus against large of 15 points, which makes sense since it's considered a spear. They're once again very fast, and they have a poison on their attack, and this is going to help debuff enemies in the similar fashion of Nurgle. We basically reduce enemy speed, enemy armor piercing missile damage, base missile damage, and weapon damage across the board. So basically all damage goes down by 15%, help you survive a bit longer. Pretty low health here, only 60 units in this retinue, which is pretty standard for cavalry. 750 mass, which continues the trend of not having extremely massive units for collision, but more for the sake of just having speed to get into a good position, apply your debuff, apply your charge bonus, get good damage on the enemy, and you pretty much want to stay in there and fight. The low melee attack and melee defense is pretty reflective of the fact that you have basically Marauders on these Hellstriders. Not very good stats across the board, but the debuff is nice. In terms of abilities, we have Vanguard deployment on them. They can hide, immune to psychology, as with the Marauders, causes fear on top of that, and we have Soul Hunter. So this is a different variation of benefiting from the pains of enemies. Previously we have Soul Scent, which increases our armor piercing damage and melee attack based on enemy wavering leadership. Here we just want to kill. Basically we'll intensify our defensive stats and charge bonus, so damage resistant up to 22%, leadership up to 16 points, charge bonus up to 10 points if these units can rack up kills. And this makes these, which are considered pretty much a light cavalry, the perfect chase down units. Basically, if other units start routing, send these boys in, get easy kills, let them rack up those defensive stats, those charge bonus stats, and leadership, and then just charge them back in for tough fights in the end. And I think that's a really great use of these units, as they will help you debuff the enemy as well. If you have a couple of tough enemies to take down at the end of battles, well, they can take down the easy ones in the beginning to try to rack up kills, and chasing down router unit also helps build up Slaanesh's army ability bars to use your unique faction army abilities. So it all works out quite great. And if the spear variety can mount the Hellstriders, then the whip variety can as well, as we can go up to 700 cost, and we have the Hellscourge variant of the Hellstriders of Slaanesh. Yeah, if you remember, the whip variant had better defense, and that's still the case here. Even though both melee attack and melee defense have gone up, weapon damage is mainly base, there is no bonuses anymore, and we still have the poison trait. Charge bonus is the same mass, same numbers, same health. So just a weapon swap to focus more on defense, which I don't know if it's necessarily the good thing here, but for a light cavalry unit, like, you're not really looking for extra defense, but they do have better melee attack as well. So if you're not going up against large units, maybe these will do better, but these are also a little bit more expensive. In terms of abilities, very much the same. Soul Hunters to rack up those 3 extra bonuses on killing enemy units, and we still have Vanguard Deployment, Hide, Immune to Psychology, and Cause Fear. Then moving up at 800 cost, we have the Seeker Chariots. So there are 4 of these in a retinue, and they have decent mass, 2,250, which is pretty high for the Slaanesh roster. And we now have some Daemonettes sitting on top of this Hellstrider-driven Chariot that has very, very spiky wheels, and it has a decent amount of health per unit if you do the division here. Armor goes up quite a bit compared to most of the Slaanesh roster so far. Leadership is still the average points of 60, speed is very high at 100. These will also have poison. Basically, Hellstrider units will have poison, because Hellstriders are poisonous. We have magical attack on them, because these are demon units once again, because of the Daemonettes on top. Only 28 points of melee attack and 26 point melee defense. These really, require the charge bonus to deal a lot of damage, and collision comes in with 2,250 mass. 50 points of charge bonus, very, very high. 44 points of weapon strength, not so high, especially for a unit that has, only 4 in a retinue. Most of the damage is armor piercing, which is great, and a big bonus against infantry, 22 points. Finally, abilities will take advantage of our very high charge bonus by having devastating flankers. So you really want to move these guys into a flanking position, either from the rear or from the side flanks. Have them charge in. They're very good against anti-infantry. Apply the collision, apply the charge bonus, do a damage, and then cycle charge. You actually want to cycle charge these guys. They are demons, therefore they get the 20% physical resistance. They will also cause fear, along with all the demonic traits. Then moving up to 1000 cost, we have the Seekers of Slaanesh, which are the Daemonettes now mounted on a Hellstrider, a different combination of these two creatures, and we have back to 5 points of armor, basically no armor on the Daemonettes. Leadership is still 60, speed is still 100, we are still poisonous because of the Hellstriders. 40 points of melee attack, which is pretty good. Magical attack because we have Daemonettes on top, so a combination of those two traits. 36 melee defense, 40 points of weapon strength, most of it being armor piercing, 1030 breakdown, so pretty good there. 60 units, same as most cavalry units, 750 mass, so still the same as the earlier unit. Health is still not very high. Charge bonus is very good at 40, and that can be doubled with devastating flankers. These will have your Vanguard deployment, causes fear, demon traits, can hide, physical resistance because of the demon. So pretty standard. Also a light cavalry, a little bit more expensive since you're getting better stats across the board, but still very fragile with low health, low armor. So you gotta be pretty careful with these. You want to charge them out with fast speed, get a flank, deal heavy damage using your charge bonus, and that's pretty much how these units are designed to work. Then jumping up to 1200 cost, we have another Chariot with the Hellflayers. Still 4 per retinue, still the same mass, relatively the same amount of health. We have 40 points armor, so the Chariot armor still stays the same, also on the low end for most of the Slaanesh's roster. We have a little bit of improved leadership, same 100 point of speed. We are still poisonous and magical because of the Daemonette plus the Hellstrider combination. Not a lot of melee attack, not a lot of melee defense, but the weapon damage is huge, with most of it being armor piercing, 1436 breakdown for 50 points, and a huge 28 points bonus against infantry, which is sort of their highlight. We still have the very nice 50 point charge bonus, as well as the devastating flanker bonus on top of Soul Scent, which means we want to rout enemy units, and we have cause fear. Basically, any sort of wavering effect near us will boost our damage output as well as our melee attack, which could use some help because melee attack is actually quite low. But aside from that, it's not too different from the other Chariot because the mass didn't go up, the health didn't go up. It's still a very good anti-infantry option. You're basically just paying up a little bit more for a little bit more damage and extra trait in the potential for more damage if you have a situation where enemy units are having low morale. Which is weird that we see morale here, even though the game used the term leadership. I'm just noticing that because I've been trying to say leadership even though playing way too much 3K. But anyways, let's move on to the next unit. Then jumping up to 1400 cost, we have the more premium cavalry option for Slaanesh with the Heartseekers of Slaanesh. These are still your Hell Rider with sort of the Exalted Daemonettes on top, and we can kind of tell by their improved stats. Still 15 armor though, the mass is the same, health is a little bit higher I believe, leadership's a little bit higher, melee attack is very good at 46, melee defense very good at 40, weapon strength, most of it being armor piercing, 1234 breakdown, charge bonus at 46, which is better than the standard cavalry option so far, and we are going to have a lot of traits. We have Vanguard deployment, cause fear, hide, we can double our 46 charge bonus with devastating flanker. We are a demon, we have soul scent, which means if we kill, we have enemy units, wavering near us, we're able to pick up extra armor piercing damage, which will help because we have 34 points of it. That's very high. We already have very high melee attack, but more the merrier, and because we're a demon unit, we get that physical resistance. So pretty much just paying for a more premium stat line. Still a cavalry unit, still have the same 750 mass. A little bit less fragile, but honestly, still pretty fragile. But that is not our best cavalry or chariot unit, as we still have the Exalted Seeker Chariot at 1500 cost, and this is going to be the top end unit for this category. It is a single entity now, and the mass goes up to 2750 as we now have a 4-wheel drive, big blade in the middle, plus 4 Hellstriders, not 4 wheels, but they're kind of driving our machine here. A giant chariot with still 40 armor, so basically all the chariots have 40 armor, 70 leadership. There's not a lot of variations to leadership, it's either 60 or 70, both are decent value. Still 100 points of speed, very fast unit, 34 melee attack, which isn't very high. We do have the poison still because of the Hellstriders. 32 defense, also not very high melee defense. Weapon strength goes up, 240, 70, 170 breakdown with 30 points against infantry. If we consider that the 4 unit per retinue chariots were dishing around 50 damage, then this is a slight improvement, right? Because each of them will be doing 50. Now we have one that's doing 240, slightly higher. Charge bonus goes way up. That's kind of the big bonus here, and probably easier to micro as you have this unit crash into infantry as a single entity. I think it's actually better than having 4, because oftentimes when you're trying to cycle charge with 4 chariots, for example, if one of them is still caught next to an infantry, it can't cleanly exit, whereas if you have one big chariot, it's a lot easier to micro in some sense. So I think there is a benefit there. In terms of abilities, we have devastating flanker, but most importantly, we have perfect vigor. So we will basically be fatigue immune, never have a dip of stats, always maintain our speed. This is actually super key. And we also have a lot of health. Obviously, being a single entity, we also have the problem of wounds. So if we ever dip below 25% health, which will be an issue, we'll lose 20% of our damage. We also lose 10% of our speed, both of which are pretty devastating for us as a chariot unit. But the combination of perfect vigor, devastating flanker with such high charge bonus, demon unit of course, banish is still an issue, and physical resistance is still an issue. The combination of wounds and demon as a trait is a issue in my mind, because you could end up with a situation where you dip like about a third, where you don't trigger wounds, but like if you start wavering, you start triggering all your demonic instabilities or banish, and you just start depleting health and burn away, but you never rout, so you end up just triggering wounds, and then you just slowly burn away as you become weaker and weaker. So keeping the unit healthy is definitely key, but I think the micro potential is a lot higher because of the fact that this is a single entity. So there's pros and cons to it, and having 75 charge bonus get doubled when you come in from a flank just sounds very impressive. So great unit here. Moving on to monsters and beasts, we find our familiar Chaos Furies of the Slaanesh variety. Nothing too different about these. We're still a very light flying light cavalry equivalent. Very fragile, almost no mass, only 40 of us. Magic damage, we are a demonic unit. Weapon strength is pretty good with a lot of armor piercing damage. They're very good harassment units overall, pretty much the same across the board for all the Chaos factions. I believe this is our only flyer unit as well, because our speed advantage is limited on the ground as the Slaanesh faction, so there is some value there as our only flying option. Ability wise, Vanguard deployment, we also pick up devastating flanker. This sets us apart from our other Chaos Fury counterparts in essence, and that's good because our charge bonus could use a doubling up here to add some damage to our charge, and there's always good angles you can get with flying units charging down at infantry, for example. The rest is pretty standard across the board. Then jumping up to 1000 cost, we have another unit that's shared across the board with the Chaos faction, and that's the Spawn of Slaanesh here. Once again, these are going to be unbreakable. Now, they are going to have the Sporic Musk, which is the debuff ability, which is not on their melee attack. Huh. This might be a bug. Well, we're going to report that because I think they should have it if it's listed up here. So basically we need to see a little symbol here that will decrease the enemy melee attack and melee defense by 5 points when they attack. That's going to set them apart from the other spawns. Unbreakable unit, low armor, glass cannon, damage build, high damage of course, and decent mass of 1500, 16 per retinue, decent health. Ability wise, we have Unbreakable of course, Siege Attacker, and we pick up Devastating Flanker on top of that. Our charge bonus of 30 isn't low, so this obviously helps. Creating angles with Slaanesh faction seems to be the key, combining your speed with different angle attack for bonus damage on the initial charge, route them, boost a lot of units, chase down those kills, and continue to boost up other units as a whole package combination here. Jumping to 1300 cost, we have the Fiends of Slaanesh, and we have once again a very fast unit. 95 speed for sort of a monstrous infantry option, pretty fast. Some armor, 30 points. This is relative to Slaanesh's faction, of course. For most other factions, this is like no armor, but we actually have people with only 5 points of armor in this roster, so 30 is respectable. We're a little bit less than a Chariot. 60 points of leadership, 95 speed as we mentioned. We actually have Sporic Musk like our card says, which is good. And 36 melee attack, having the magic damage because... Are we a demon unit? Yes, we are a demon unit. Seems like there's less icons because they're not displaying the other icons. It's kind of weird. But we are a demon unit. We have the magic attack on that. Same melee attack and melee defense, 36. I would say this is on the low end for the cost of the unit. Weapon strength is pretty good. 25-55 breakdown, most of it being armor piercing. And 38 charge bonus, which I believe will get doubled with Devastating Flanker. Demon unit, therefore we get the physical resistance, cause fear. Also consider Siege Attacker because it is a monster unit. And as we mentioned, only 12 here in a retinue. Mass is not super high, but decent. 1300 mass. Health is pretty good. I think per unit health is going to be on par with what we saw with the spawn. I think that one's 8k-ish health, and we had 16 there. So relatively the same amount of health per monster here. Then moving up to 1900 cost, we have the Soul Grinder of Slaanesh. And unlike the other Soul Grinders, we're the only one without a range attack, which is kind of sad, but we do pick up the Sporic Musk as an added bonus, as well as the trait of Devastating Flanker. Everything else is pretty much on par with other Soul Grinders. High armor, finally for our roster, 65 leadership, 75 speed. We have the 55 melee attack, 35 melee defense. These are all pretty standard, I think, across the board for the Soul Grinders. 520 attack, it's also standard as well. Bonus against large of 25 points on top of that, most of this being armor piercing. Good charge bonus will help us. Combine that with pretty decent speed. The mass is actually pretty high, 4,000. It's going to be one of our highest math here in the army. And basically going to have this unit charge in, deal massive amount of damage, and cycle charge because we have the mass to get out as well. A single entity will help there. It also has Strider, which means it won't be penalized by terrain. Cause fear and terror, which makes it immune from fear and terror. Consider a siege attacker. We will suffer a bit from the wounds mechanic, and we are a demonic unit with 20% physical resistance. Last but not least, we have the most expensive unit in our roster at 2,000, the Keeper of Secret. This is a monster spellcaster, single entity, 3,500 mass, pretty good amount of health, no armor once again. We do carry a shield, 35% block chance for a small arm missile fires from the front. Leadership of 70, not a lot of variation in the roster. I think that we have 165 and everyone else is 60 or 70. So 70 is on the high end for us. 80 speed, very good speed here. Melee attacks also very high, melee defense is very high, magic damage there. Weapon strength incredibly high at 470, most of it being armor piercing, matching that of the Soul Grinder. Actually, we're only missing a bit of damage, and I think it's like 10 points of armor piercing and 40 points of base. Like, that's the difference between the two. Charge bonus of only 35, which is a little bit disappointing. Ability wise, we end up with Devastating Flanker as well. We don't have a lot of charge bonus compared to the other charge options we've seen, so that part is a little bit lacking. We do have a new ability called Blissful Rupture, which is a passive ability that will boost the whole map when we're casting, of giving all the units 12 points of melee attack and 4 points of leadership. And speaking of casting and spells, we have 2 spells, the Lash of Slaanesh. This will cost 6 wind of magic. It's a breath attack in a tier shape. Not a lot of damage actually, 12 points per seconds there. Range of 100, which is also not very long range. But it's something, especially since we can trigger Blissful Rapport here that can boost quite a bit of melee attack for the army as a whole. Our army, if you notice, is mainly focused on charging, attacking, and flanking. And there's small debuffs on certain units that can poison, that can reduce their melee attack and melee defense with the Musk. So basically a slight debuff, similar to Nurgle, but we're not trying to grind out against them. We're trying to deal damage. We're trying to route units. We're trying to get buffs from routing units. We're trying to chase down kills from routing units. This unit here is also going to have the Strider trait. And the last spell we have is a Hex that will reduce enemy melee defense and speed from a 200 range for 25 seconds. So nothing too fancy here. And as a unit, obviously you're paying for a lot of the stats, but you're also paying for the access to the spells, especially the Blissful Rapport here. And that's going to do it for the Slaanesh roster. Hopefully you guys enjoyed our roster overviews. Technically, we covered all the launch factions, but as I mentioned, there's still Ogre coming next week, and we'll definitely do an Ogre faction roster overview. Ogres have a ton of units. I think over 23. I think they have the largest unit roster, quote-unquote, on launch, because if you pre-order, you definitely get it. Aside from Demons of Chaos, but that doesn't count because you basically get all 4 Chaos faction rosters combined together. So I'm not considering that really a launch roster, but Ogres have a lot of units, and we'll come back and check those out next time. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you all then. Bye!